Namaste, namaskaram, vanakkam, salam alaikum, and a sunny bonani to everyone on this beautiful Heritage Day 2020. My name is Tashmika Sharma, and on behalf of the South African Hindu Mahasabha, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us in this interfaith harmony and social cohesion workshop. I'd now like to hand you over to Mr. Trigamji, someone who needs no introduction, the President of the South African Hindu Mahasabha. Thank you so much, Mr. Trigamji.
Thank you, Tashmika, and good afternoon to everybody. Can we just observe a moment of silence and meditation for a while? Thank you. As South Africans, it's a very important day in our lives today, Heritage Day. But when we look back, we come from pre-94, a life of separation and oppression. And today, our constitution, I think, starts off with "We the people, united in our diversity." And that's probably what this afternoon's workshop is all about. We have joining us, and I want to personally thank each and every one of them for making themselves available. I'm going to just simply mention the names, and Tashmika will in due course introduce them as they are about to make their presentations. Swami Vedanand Saraswati from the Arya Pratinidhi Sabha, my good friend and colleague, Bishop Malusi Mphulwana, who is the head of the South African Council of Churches, and then an old childhood friend, Professor Saths Cooper, Ms. Nalini Gengan from the Cape, very, very strong supporter of the South African Hindu Mahasabha and a very strong leader in the Hindu community in the Cape. We have Professor Solly Dangor, as he mentioned earlier on, referred to our good old days when we were in the religious broadcasting panel in the South African Broadcasting Corporation. That's when they still had such an organization. And then, of course, a very close friend of the Mahasabha and somebody with whom we work regularly with, MEC Honorable Ravi Pillay. And lastly, but not least, of course, good friend of the South African Hindu Mahasabha and a personal friend, Professor Ashwin Desai. Welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And without much ado, I'm going to ask our program director, Tashmika, to commence the program. Thank you, Tashmika.
Thank you so much, Mr. Trigamji. So we are going to get straight into it. Each speaker today will make a presentation on the role of religion in promoting tolerance, peace, and harmony, how the faith sector contributes to social cohesion, and what can we do to reduce religious tensions. Our first speaker today is Swami Vedanand Saraswati. Swamiji is the yawned and very dynamic spiritual head of the Arya Samaj, South Africa. He was initiated into the Order of Sannyasa by H.H. Pujaya Swami Chidanand Saraswati Ji, spiritual head and president of Parmarth Niketan Ashram, Rishikesh, India, on the 14th of June 2016. Swamiji remains committed to the social welfare and spiritual education of the people by promoting the Vedic value system and spreading knowledge of Vedas to all. Swamiji leads the Humanitarian, Environmental and Animal Liberation Foundation, which is the humanitarian wing of the Arya Samaj, South Africa. Swamiji, my salutations and prostrations unto you. We look forward to you enlightening us this afternoon.
Bless you. Thank you so much, Program Director, President of the Mahasabha, Shri Ashwin Trigamji, my distinguished panelists, and all our dear participants. My humble namaste to each and every one of you. I shall start by a very famous and potent mantra. Ayam bandurayam Neti Ganana Laguchetasham Uddhara Charitanam Tu Vasudheva Kutumbakam. Only the narrow-minded discriminate by saying one is a relative, the other is a stranger. For those who live magnanimously, the entire world constitutes but a family. Maha Upanishad, chapter 6, verse 72. This statement is just not about peace and harmony in the community, but it is most importantly about a truth that society as a whole, all nations and races are one family, the children of one universal creator. This is what the phrase Vasudeva Kutumbakam encapsulates. The ultimate goal that religion teaches us is to strive for the highest good and the welfare of all, to promote the physical, spiritual, and social development of all beings. No one should remain content with his or her welfare alone, but consider his or her welfare in the welfare and well-being of all. The individual good is always latent in the collective good. This is what Hindu philosophy, as enshrined in the Vedic scriptures, declares. My friends, we are all experiencing a time we never thought in our wildest imaginations would come to pass in our lifetime at least. And with it brought immense suffering, uncertainty, and immeasurable loss. And if that wasn't worse, we are also seemingly to seem that we are in the middle of what looks like a religious Cold War, and a steady and soon uncontrollable religious unrest and intolerance, which is creating deep divides, especially in a community that once came into this land together, toiled together, lived together, fought together, and succeeded together. Yet somehow, somewhere, we have lost our hold to the fabric that held us together and are allowing ourselves to lose sight of our compassion, tolerance, peace, and unity. I was once proud to exclaim to conferences in other countries that we are not victims of religious intolerance, as ours is the rainbow nation. A nation where no one culture, religion, or language could singularly define it. We did not have that disease, where sadly in many countries, to believe that some people need to be forced or lured or convinced or threatened to agree with other religious beliefs and dogmas has always been the cause of great instability. Lest I say, my friends, could I have spoken too soon? What is tolerance? In one sense, tolerance is bearing with the disagreeable and the unacceptable. But this is negative tolerance. It means you dislike or disagree with something, but you put up with it for one reason or the other. Technically, this is not tolerance, but a pretense of tolerance. Because your heart and soul are not in it, but mentally you resign yourself to accept it. You put up with it out of fear or under duress. However, my friends, there's another kind of tolerance, which is very positive and the essential of spiritual or religious living. It is accepting and respecting willfully the differences that exist in the world as part of God's creation and diversity. It is acknowledging and respecting the subtle nuances and the rich diversity we perceive in God's creation without being disturbed by them or even abandoning our own. It is acknowledging the rights of others to live according to their choices and preferences whilst respecting our own. A freedom protected by our Constitution. It is honoring the ultimate truth that God is all and all are God's numerous manifestations, and each aspect of His creation is sacred and important as ourselves. This kind of tolerance is true tolerance, which arises from our convictions, knowledge, understanding, empathy, and compassion. It is the kind of tolerance that Hinduism promotes as an essential part of its philosophy and practice. The key to remember is that this tolerance works both ways, where I love and respect you and your path, whilst you equally love and respect me and my path. While tolerance was the idea projected by many scriptures, sadly, the compulsions of reality often prompted people to vent their feelings against other faiths. The religious moral response to intolerance, and most importantly, the emphasis on unity, must therefore begin theologically with the origin of all in God. God, my friends, is not the national or ancestral deity of a particular religious or indigenous community, but the source of all life and existence. God is not limited by our own man-made boundaries or borders, and we should never assume that one community is favored or privileged by God above all others. The Vedas and their teachings are based not just on a particular messenger or prophet, but are universal in their message. It states, Manur Bhavajanaya Devyam Janam. O man, be a good human being and make a society of divinely enlightened people. Rigveda, book 10, chapter 53, verse 6. A person who learns to treat other human beings with respect, recognizing their joys and sorrows as well as aspirations in life are similar to one's own, and has adopted the golden rule in one's life, do unto others as you would like them done to you. The Vedic mantra of Yajurveda, chapter 40, verse 5, describes the same thing. Yastu sarvani bhutan yatmane vanupashyati sarve bhuteshu chatmanam tato na vichikitsati. Whoever sees in himself all living beings, and in all living beings sees the supreme soul, that person does not have any loathing for others and develops love and compassion for all living beings. As a proud and progressive follower of Dharma, I go firmly by what the Vedas say. Ekam sat vipra bahuta vadanti. God, the truth, is one, but the wise call him by many names. It is further declared by all that no one is superior or inferior. All are brothers and sisters, and all should strive for the interest of all and progress collectively. Not only are all human beings born equally, but they are also born with equal dignity and human rights. Religious tolerance cannot be ensured merely through constitutional means. It has to be embedded in the basic value system of society. Now, not all practice religious tolerance equally. On the one end, you have those who display extreme tolerance in the face of extreme aggression. And on the other end, you have those who want to retaliate and answer violence with violence. In between the two groups falls the majority with varying degrees of tolerance and intolerance. This group remains largely peaceful and tolerant, but when passions are incited, my friends, one can feel their frustration and anger in public and on social media platforms. The intolerance of many, in fact, is an acquired trait learned in response to the intolerance they see, and we all see, in other communities. Now, my friends, this is where we as religious leaders must ensure that amidst the tumult of discordant voices, we must understand that somewhere inside, they also recognize the importance of living in peace, and we must raise the importance of that peace. Indians are in this beautiful land for over 160 years. It is now our home. Majority of us were born here. We made it our home together because we struggled together. We fought for the freedom of this country together, hand in hand. Many of us are politically conscious. We have remarkable knowledge of the world and the events that happen in other parts of the world, and as such, we are well aware of the divisive nature of religious intolerance and its adverse effects upon the interests of a nation. Therefore, for the order and regularity of our pluralistic society, our rainbow nation, religious tolerance is a compelling necessity. No country can make progress if its people remain divided. We must, as their leaders, guide them, guide our people, our congregants, those who listen to us. We must equally stand united and be an example of the unity we want them to exude. And we can't only talk about it. We must walk the talk, change and move away from selfish and hateful agendas. Before we go on rampage in the name of religion, we must learn to practice our religion, serve in righteous action and not wasteful speech. We must truly respect one another and understand that tolerance works both ways. We must respect religious freedom, which means respecting the freedom of choice. But most importantly, my friends, the freedom of informed choice, not choice out of fear, compulsion, duress, or desperation. When all the hatred and selfishness is out, you put our values and morals back in. Values like compassion, love, integrity, and kindness. Values that are natural to humanity and enshrined in all our scriptures. You put this in and our whole world changes. You put this in and we become one healthy, undivided, compassionate family, united in our diversity. This is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is Ubuntu. When you feed a hungry child or clothe someone who is impoverished, do you do it because they are Hindu, Muslim, or Christian? Or do you do it because they are a human being who is suffering? Religion, my friends, is defined by our humanity, not by our insanity. Though we may belong to and work for different movements, we serve the same society. Humanity has no labels, no religion, no language. It is heart to heart. It is soul to soul. May our collective actions as one multi-faith family speak louder than the sounds of violence and disharmony and actions of hate that threatens to divide us. We cannot talk and be actionless anymore. It is time we go out without fear of condemnation, without fear of ridicule, and be a voice of action, truth, and compassion. Yes, we must protect, preserve, and uphold our diversity, our cultures, religions, and traditions, so long as we equally respect the diversity of others. After all, we shall all converge and walk on the same road to salvation one day. Humanity is one, and we are all a part of it. We are all responsible. We can change the world, and we must change the world. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see. And it's no longer a matter of how, but when. I leave you with the closing mantra of the Rigveda. Sankajadvam samvadadvam samvomanansi janatam deva bhagam yathavur purve sanjanana upasate. May you move in harmony, speak in one voice. Let your minds be in agreement, just as the ancient sages relegated in unity. With all the love, light, and peace of my heart, thank you and namaste.
Thank you so much. Namaste, Swamiji. Thank you for your very powerful presentation addressing issues of religious tolerance, human rights, morals and values, and of course the Ubuntu philosophy. Thank you for that. Our next presentation will be by Bishop Malusi Mphulwana. Bishop Malusi is the chairperson of the South African Council of Churches, spearheading its commitment to lead common Christian action that works for moral witness in South Africa, addressing issues of social and economic justice, national reconciliation, the integrity of creation, eradication of poverty, and contributing towards the empowerment of those who are spiritually, socially, and economically marginalized. Alongside Steve Biko, he and his wife, Toko Mphulwana, were founding activists in the anti-apartheid Black consciousness movement in South Africa. Bishop Malusi is the chairperson of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Social Behavioral Change. It is such a pleasure to be speaking with you this afternoon, Bishop. Thank you so much. Bishop Malusi?
Thank you for having me. I think that narrative that says my wife and I were part of the founding of Black consciousness cannot be true, because we came into it at least 2 years into Black consciousness. But anyway, I don't know where that comes from, but I often hear it. They always have to do this. They say, no, that's not true. I was not there in 1968. Thank you very much. This is a very important subject. I was much intrigued by it, because we have had the conversation about social cohesion in going a different direction. And I said to myself, should I not? And I think I decided I would. And here we are. We are to discuss the role of religion in promoting tolerance, peace, and harmony in South Africa. The question might differently be whether religion can promote peace and harmony where it has no relation to power. And if religion has to play a role, what might be the positive role of religion in relation to power and identity? I suggest that there is a strong relationship between power and identity, in which religion can and has played a significant role, positively or negatively. However, I'm afraid the more pronounced examples of the role of religion have not been considered altogether positive by all who have experienced it. And in a way, it's almost like religion can choose to say, I'm just living my religion, I have nothing to do with power, or religion can actually become an instrument in power. The current example of the radical religious evangelical base of President Trump that feeds on racism against African Americans, xenophobia against Latin Americans from Mexico and the South is one such example. The Boko Haram campaign in northern Nigeria is another example where religion determines whether a victim lives or dies. Another example is that of the new BJP policies of Prime Minister Modi in India, depending on how one looks at it, I suppose. Earlier this year I was in India, and the issue of citizenship was still ablaze on account of the Citizenship Amendment Bill enacted in January 2019. Now, for 7 decades, India was held together by a constitution that guarantees equality regardless of religious persuasion. The new law seeks to grant Indian citizenship to illegal immigrants belonging to Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, or Christian communities from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. But it excludes Muslims, not only from Pakistan, but also from where they are minorities in Nepal and Sri Lanka. And my friends in India explained to me that this is really because the Hindus are not granted citizenship in Pakistan, and therefore, if they come on over to India, then they will be granted, those who are refugees will be granted citizenship. Now, if we look at South Africa, if we were to look at South Africa, we cannot but look back to both the colonial and apartheid experiences. In colonial South Africa, privilege and opportunity for Africans was granted through conversion to Christianity. So much so that in the Natal colony, they were so-called exempted Africans, amazemtiti. And they had to assume a new identity, a new religion, and new trappings of power. This was the logic of the mission schools of Lovedale, Hilltown, Adams College, Inada Seminary, and so on. An interesting thing about this is that when there's a place called Gliblands and Nini, beach in the south coast, as well as even McCall's Hospital, these were properties that were given in trust, and in these trusts there had to be at least one worthy Bantu, and this worthy Bantu meant one who was an exempted Bantu because of their faith. Now, later, a more organized and targeted and maybe more crude version was the African apartheid use of religion to stratify society racially and to secure their power. In South Africa today, the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, The question is, what is the relationship between religion, identity, and power today? Why is it that those who seek power will go to all the religious sites ahead of elections? It would appear to me that the racial and economic power relations of apartheid have a more significant impact than religion per se today. In other words, whereas in apartheid days, your religion and race guaranteed better opportunity to power, but religion was central. But today, you don't need religion so much to access power and authority, except, of course, as a voting pool. Is the Christian religion of apartheid power still important as a power identity or for access to power? I suggest not. But the fruit of the historical use of the combination of race and religion has given white South Africans the eternal benefit that militates against meaningful social cohesion. I'm almost suggesting that real social cohesion cannot be without addressing the economic power relations. It is not only going to be in religion. The Black consciousness philosophy suggests that there has to be a deliberate quest for solidarity among all those who are historically oppressed and excluded from economic and political power. Happened instead, politics has become the area of contestation where religion is used for political access, hence the rallies at religious sites. Hence all the political parties flock to religious gatherings ahead of elections. Religion becomes a tool for vote fishing and a sedative for keeping people calm and contained. And so we will say, when there's a real serious problem, let us pray about it, without dealing with the real issues that change it. In this context, I wish again to go back to apartheid days religious engagement of Black theology. The limitation was that it was Christian theology, although Black was not Christian. But to the extent that it challenged political and economic power relations, it had the potential of engaging power relations. I began by saying the question might be whether religion can promote peace and harmony where it has no relation to power. And if religion has to play a role, what might be the role of religion in relation to power and aid? I suggest that we need to interrogate power relations and how our religion plays into that in order to give religion a positive space in the power to influence for social cohesion. For now, we're at the mercy of the axis of economic and political power, where identity chambers are largely as inherited from apartheid. Where power is accessed through a religious platform, religious tolerance is threatened. It seems to me that we have a duty to create the environment that banishes the need to use religion for political and economic benefit. Our spirituality cannot and should not be blind to the life realities of our society and cannot be confined to the sanctuary, but must be incarnated into the life realities of our people. In this context, the South African Council of Churches suggested that one way to achieve social cohesion and mutual tolerance must come from the achievement of the promise of the post-apartheid society, which is a just, reconciled, peaceful, equitable, and sustainable society that is free of racism, of tribalism, xenophobia, and gender prejudices, free of corruption and deprivation, where food and shelter for every person, and where every child born can grow to its God-given potential. Now, for this conversation, of course, this had four themes: anchoring democracy for good governance, economic transformation, comprehensive quality education, and healing and reconciliation. For this conversation, a focus on healing and reconciliation, the entry point for social cohesion, where reconciliation enables us to be mutually cohesive. Reconciliation is often seen as mainly referring to racial or ethnic reconciliation, but it must go beyond the tradition and must go beyond the traditional concerns. It must include addressing poverty and inequality, economic transformation for a reconciled economic dispensation, A healed and reconciled South Africa must be a society that has faced squarely the stark realities of the systemic impact of poverty, of broken families, of redefined family structures, of abiding racism and ethnicism as an identity rallying phenomenon. In Black consciousness terms, it means religion must contribute to the reversing of that which defined Black under apartheid, in the solidarity of Africans, Indians, and Coloureds as historically oppressed, denied the this is in the cultures, very important in the cultures where religion is an integral part of the whole of life and is not separated out as a separate area, as is the case with Western religions. Where it is understood as a path for the whole of life of the community and of the individual within it. And so with the religions of the majority, whether you're talking about Hinduism or Christians as experienced in African societies, religion is not outside of one's life. It is part of the whole. And therefore, you cannot therefore separate it out into the sanctuary when you're dealing with social cohesion in society. I suppose I should pause here and just say very briefly that I'm talking about, therefore, a reconciliation that begins to reconcile with oneself, which is where Black consciousness comes to play, because it says, who am I? Identity. And how does that identity relate to the economic opportunities I have, and therefore to power relationships? And therefore, social cohesion, therefore, flows out of a better appreciation of that and dealing with it decisively, deliberately, institutionally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop Malusi. Thank you for your presentation. I really like that you looked at the relationship between religion, social cohesion, and power relations. Thank you for that. Our next presentation will be by Professor Saths Cooper. Prof. Cooper is the president of the International Union of the Psychological Science and Pan-African Psychology Union. A close associate of the late Steve Biko, he was banned and house arrested in 1973 and jailed for 9 years, spending over 5 years in Robben Island, sharing the same cell block as former President Nelson Mandela from 1977 to 1982. He played a key role in the advent of democracy in South Africa, the unification and ascendancy of psychology, and youth and community reconstruction and development during and after apartheid. Prof. Cooper, it is an honor to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Hindu Mahasabha for inviting me to what I hope won't be regarded as too iconoclastic a presentation. These are my thoughts, having grown up in a Hindu family and being surrounded by others who were not Hindu, but who were Christian and primarily African, just outside Claremont Township. Now, the constitution that we constantly rely on protects all sorts of rights, and the topic that you've wisely chosen covers many areas of it. What is the glue in this is people's education, attitude, and how we deal with the worst of amongst us, which underpins our own claim to being whatever we claim it to be. The sadness after 26 years of democracy in this country is that we've inherited discredited apartheid underpinnings, like the population registration of 4 groups. Indeed, we often forget that historically, all of us who were not white were classified in the colonial period as colored. And one of the 7 designations of colored was Asian and other Asian as well. It's only fairly recently that after the Act of Union, that the population groups as we know them have emerged. But the sadness is that we haven't risen above that ascription. Those underpinnings have created the conditions for the crass resurgence of racism and rising intolerance as reflected in society currently, and particularly under the COVID-19 pandemic conditions. We've seen the rants and the railing against one or the other in our society. For me, growing up as I have, I've never known a reductionist Hinduism that is narrow, bigoted, exclusionary, or feeling superior. And that's why when I went to University College in 1968, it became very easy to engage with Steve Biko at the University of Natal Medical School and take the journey to SASO, the Black People's Convention, and the underpinnings of Black consciousness. So if I'm asked, and I am often, how do you describe yourself? I say I am a human being. I'm a Black South African of fourth generation indentured stock. That grand experiment that the British emerged with after the ending of formal chattel slavery. But in all of this that we're talking about, it actually begins with me and ends with me. We cannot blame others for how they treat of us and how they engage or don't engage with us if we ourselves are trapped and arrested by the marks of our terrible origin. We are one of the most diverse societies on earth, where some 95% of the world's population, not just here, the world's population, can trace their DNA to the Komani San of the southern Kalahari Desert bordering Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. Yet, there is this difference that emerges, almost creating those who are regarded as human and those who are regarded as non-human. And therefore, there's been, because we've inherited the trappings of apartheid, an insidious resurrection of non-white as the patently inferior appellation intended to diminish, to inferiorize, to render effete and ineffectual as an appendage of white. And yet, our biology is the same. The majority of people on earth share the same biology, except for a tiny percentage who may have some part of them missing through congenital defect. But all of us have the same biology. All of us have melanin, lesser or greater. All of us have hair, differing in texture. It would be a boring world indeed if all of us looked like me, spoke like me, thought like me, walked like me, wore the same boring clothes. In this Heritage Month, we actually don't cherish the rich wealth of culture, of diversity, of language, of viewing the world. And somehow, the narrow politics of exclusion and inclusion have created further divisions of them and us. Now, Steve Biko, and I'm going to quote him, said, all societies, and indeed all individuals, ancient or modern, young or old, identify themselves with a particular religion, and when none is existent, they develop one. He goes on to say, essentially, the Black community is a very religious community, which often reflects on being. In other words, what is my purpose in life? Why am I here? Who am I? And again, I bring in the issue of how we treat those who are different or appear different to us underpins our own claim to being part of the human family. Biko and Black consciousness maintain that at the rendezvous of victory, no society can have half human beings who took external points of reference and yet claim to be free, let alone being transformed. An almost autonomous reliance on allowing ourselves to be called a negative of another, such as that pejorative ascription of non-white. So if we remove the white from the term non-white, we remain with a lack of, a negative of, an absence of something, of another, akin to being inhuman, a non-person, nihil, nothing. We've never referred to others as non-Black, just as it would be anathema to call anybody non-Hindu, non-Tamil, non-Gujarati, non-Muslim. It would be offensive and degrading, and therefore we need to view ourselves as part of this larger group trying to affirm ourselves in essentially a white-dominated polity. While Blacks may be a majority in terms of numbers, but everywhere, except during this day and maybe a few other days in this month, do we really affirm the heritage in what we wear? Of course, thankfully, people of Indian origin in their functions dress in the way they feel like. But if you look at Parliament, except for the opening, you could be in any parliament anywhere in the world, save for the color component. It shows us the depth to which we have been removed from ourselves. So, who am I? I cannot be a color, a language, a culture, a narrow ethnicity. I believe that I'm human, and anybody who infringes that essential dignity that I want to claim as being part of human will be offensive not only to me, but to others. I need to also say that having spent many years in prison and having been tortured by burly policemen, 6'5", 6'6", inside that brute lay an inferior, insecure little man who was terrified of the ideas that we held. We should not allow the continuation of the Bantustanization of our mind, arrested by colonial trappings, ethnicity, religious tribalism, language tribalism. We need to affirm our oneness. And in the post-George Floyd era, where people have claimed Black Lives Matter, we now need to stand up and claim our common humanity so that we cherish each other and stop the separation of them and us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Cooper. We really enjoyed your presentation, especially the fact that you reflected on South African history and also gave your personal accounts of such events. I want to say on behalf of the South African Hindu Mahasabha, thank you so much for joining this workshop. Unfortunately, Professor Cooper has to leave us due to other commitments, but thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Prof. Cooper.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay. Our next speaker is Miss Nalini Gengan, chairperson. She's the chairperson of the Hindu Association of the Western Cape and executive member of Western Cape Religious Leaders Forum. She is a practicing attorney and was a director of the Cape Law Society. She is also a member of the Multi-Faith Theological Advisory Council on Gender-Based Violence. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to your presentation, Ms. Gengan.
Thank you, Tashmika.
Thank you.
Vanakkam, love and greetings to one and all. I think that as we celebrate Heritage Day today, we should remind ourselves what President Nelson Mandela said in 1996 about why it was marked as a national day. And he said, they knew that our rich and varied cultural heritage has a profound power to build our nation. And so the topic we have today is very appropriate. But before I go into the topic today, I'd like to firstly pay tribute to our forefathers, the indentured laborers who arrived from India and South Africa from 1860 onwards, who despite their conditions which were akin to slavery and the distance from their motherland, were instrumental in promoting and maintaining their respective religions and culture so that we are able to practice same 160 years later. So despite the provisions in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights regarding the freedom of religion, we have to remember that the right is not absolute and that it is limited by other laws and rights. The freedom of religion is constantly challenged, especially in schools and in the workplace, regarding nose rings, red strings, religious holidays, and such matters have come before our courts, even the Constitutional Court. In many cases, though, intolerance is not about a faith community, but about individual behavior. And in some instances, it's the attachment that people have to the religion they were born into or in which they converted to that makes them intolerant of others. We must also remember that opinions and perceptions of others' beliefs is also dependent on a person's life experience. And I think in some way, my own experience is what makes me say what I say. I was brought up in Pietermaritzburg amongst different faiths. The Salvation Army was next to my home. I mixed with people of African origin, participated in their functions. I mixed with everybody. And my mom was very open-minded. We attended churches, we attended the Muharram festival at the mosque. And so I think that's important, how we are brought up and the people we interact with. So presently, of course, social media also contributes to intolerance to an extent that it's easy for people to voice their opinions, which tend on hate speech from the other side of the computer or telephone screen, something that they would not do as easily if they were face-to-face. And then another reason for why religious tolerance is important to discuss is that the strong reactions by communities to the threats of conversion. The conversions are normally associated with criticism of persons' religious practices and also takes advantage of people of the vulnerability of certain individuals, people who are unemployed, people who are suffering or going through illness. And then, of course, there's also the case of forced conversions. But I think the subtopic is important because we must also remember that there is a changing social landscape in South Africa with a greater number of cross-cultural marriages and a large number of multi-faith families. So in looking at the role of religion in promoting tolerance, peace, and harmony, I think there are two aspects I would like to emphasize. One is the impact of religion on an individual's behavior, and the second is what interfaith cooperation can do to contribute more effectively to social cohesion. So Swami already dealt with the concept of Vasudeva Kudumbakam, meaning the world is one family. And I'd also like to maybe mention that when we end our prayers with Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, we're saying, may all beings everywhere be happy and free. And in saying the prayer, we in essence are making a commitment to the thoughts, words, and actions of our own life contributing in some way to the happiness and to the freedom for all. And this sets the tone of an individual's relationship with the world, not just fellow human beings, but everything in the environment. We see God in all beings and in nature itself. Religion offers a moral voice, a challenge to injustice, and guidance on how to view the world and interact with it. So in looking at the role of religion in promoting tolerance, I believe we should be looking at what our respective religions offer. We know that religion is an integral part of culture and influences individual behavior. Besides being a system of faith and worship, religion has a set of underlying values, myths, ideas, and beliefs to shape behavior. In Hinduism, there are many texts, and I think Swami's mentioned the Vedas. There's also texts such as the Tirukural, which set out specifically how one should behave in all areas of life. These texts are not limited to application to Hindus, but of universal application. All religions teach values for day-to-day living, such as love, compassion, respect, and honesty, directed at the welfare and wellness of people. These are fundamental to building social cohesion. We should be looking at the commonality in religious teachings and values in terms of behavior. As the Divine Life says, be good and do good. There are several common traits in all religions, such as service of community, ethical codes of conduct, and respecting human rights. And I think also mentioned by Swami is teaching us not to do to others what you would not want to be done to yourself. So religion leads one to develop inner strength and coping mechanisms, and focusing on the individual's spiritual development to create happiness and peace is the greatest contribution we can make to promoting tolerance, peace, and harmony in society. This is important, especially as we face the evils of crime, abuse, and corruption in our society. We should remind ourselves of what Nelson Mandela said. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, his background, or religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than the opposite. And you maybe use an example of Christmas. Many people not of the Christian faith celebrate Christmas. Why is that so? Not because it's just a celebration of faith, but because it's a celebration of family, love, joy, and life. Which brings me to the second point, which is the role of interfaith cooperation and the role it can play in promoting tolerance, peace, and harmony in South Africa more effectively. We have to focus jointly with all faiths to teach individuals to be better Hindus, better Muslims, better Christians, in fact, just better human beings, so that they can be responsible and beneficial members of society. Faith leaders can contribute to social cohesion by independently addressing the social injustices in our society with government and the business sector. Interfaith cooperation will also mean a greater impact in holding organs of state accountable and to deal with some of the pressing social issues that cause strife to many. In partnership with the media and government, the faith communities can jointly make a positive impact in South Africa for the upliftment of its people. In Cape Town, there are two interfaith organizations which were formed after the 1999 World Parliament of Religions, the Western Cape Religious Leaders Forum and the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative. I serve on the executive of the Western Cape Religious Leaders Forum. The patrons of the forum are the Archbishops of the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba and Archbishop Stephen Brislin. And then just in terms of understanding the mission of such an interfaith organization, it's to mobilize religious leadership in the Western Cape to act jointly on behalf of faith communities to safeguard the dignity of all human persons and the well-being of all creation through social justice, and to support interfaith initiatives. And this, from a strategic session that we had recently, in South Africa, it has to be against the backdrop of Black pain. So the forum comprises religious bodies with a provincial footprint from about 25 different faith communities, SACC, Western Cape, Hindus, Dutch Reformed Church, Brahma Kumaris, the Muslim Judicial Council, the Ahlul Bayt Islamic Center, Jewish Board of Deputies, Baha'i Faith, African Traditional Leaders, Quakers, and so on. And it supports partners such as the South African Faith Communities Environment Institute and the South African Faith and Family Institute. And just some of the issues which were dealt with, which links to my earlier submissions, is the issue of the destruction of religious places, the sanitation issue in the Western Cape, xenophobia, elections, the water crisis, giving hope in the face of COVID, and of course, recently, the Black Lives Matter campaign. The Cape Town Interfaith Initiative, which has a different focus, has the mission to celebrate and share the richness of the religious and spiritual diversity in the Western Cape, to promote community interfaith understanding, harmony, and cooperation through both an awareness of universal spirituality and honoring of the dignity of difference. Interfaith is thus a space beyond an annual National Heritage Day to build relationships and understanding and to promote tolerance, peace, and harmony. And again, I quote from Nelson Mandela, "Our world is not divided by race, color, and gender, or religion. Our world is divided into wise people and fools divide themselves by race, color, gender, or religion." So my question is, who do we want to be, the former or the latter? There will always be those who focus on differences. Like they say, some people can be given a whole field of roses and will only see the thorns. However, in unity as faith communities, we can inspire South Africans to create peace and harmony and create unity in the celebration of life and gratitude for what we have as a nation while working towards the eradication of intolerance and social injustice. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Nalini Gengan. That was such a beautiful presentation. And thank you for talking about how religion can be used to address issues of ethical decline and moral degeneration. Our next presentation will be delivered by Professor Solly Dangor. Professor Dangor is Emeritus Professor at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He taught modules on Islam, as well as interfaith modules, including religion and conflict, religion and human rights, and religion and the environment. Professor Dangor's interfaith interaction includes serving on the religious broadcasting panel of the SABC, membership of the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities, and the World Conference on Religion and Peace. Your presence is truly appreciated. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Dangor.
It's my pleasure. Okay, I'm not quite sure whether I should be speaking because the previous speaker has taken a big chunk out of my speech. But in any case, here we go. Okay, we're talking about interfaith harmony and social cohesion. I'm not going to make the distinction between the two because I think interfaith harmony contributes to social cohesion. It's one aspect of social cohesion. Now, the National Heritage Day was established in 1996. And what basically it's about the different traditions, cultures, languages, or linguistic groups, while we are permitted according to the Constitution to celebrate our differences, but on the National Heritage Day, we are supposed to come together as a nation and celebrate as a nation. And that's what the whole National Heritage Day is about. Now, coming to the question about religion, can religion contribute to interfaith harmony and social cohesion? Some people might say no. Because if you look around the world today, you find conflicts between faiths. many parts of the world. We don't have to go into details about that. And but my personal belief, having looked at conflicts in the past, that it's not the religion per se which leads to conflict. Otherwise, we won't be here today talking to each other. It's not religion per se, but they're always contributing factors. And so people use religion to mobilize against others. And this has always been the case in history. So the reason why sometimes you have conflict between individuals or groups, one of the reasons is ignorance. They're quite ignorant about their own faith tradition. They may not understand the text so well. The other one is manipulation. We know that manipulation by religious leaders is quite common. They want popularity and so on. So they will demonize the other in order to get support for their own cause. And of course, politicians do that as well. We know that in many countries, and we look at the United States right now, Donald Trump is doing exactly that. He's appealing to the very conservative Christians in America to get their support for the next election. So religions can be used. And of course, within that particular context, we see that he was denigrating the Muslims, not wanting Muslims to come to America, the Mexicans, and so on. So politicians, religious leaders they manipulate religion in order to mobilize people around that particular cause. The other reason, of course, why religions may not contribute to social cohesion is because many of them see religion purely in terms of rituals. They don't see the dynamic aspect of religion, the aspect of actively serving the communities and so on. So they are confined to their rituals, and that is all they know and understand. But my answer is yes, it can contribute. It has contributed in the past, will continue to contribute in the future. Now, as far as I'm concerned, one of the main aspects of religion is the promotion of justice. When we look at our own past history here in South Africa, I'm just going to the establishment of the NIC in 1894 by Mahatma Gandhi. We find that in the struggle against British colonialism and all these regulations and laws which were trying to prevent Indians from trade and from residing in certain areas and so on. This was a combined effort of different faith communities. There's Muslims, Hindus, and some Christians who collectively fought against these regulations. So these were different faith groups, of people belonging to different faith groups, working together, working in harmony against a greater cause, a cause of injustice. And in NIC, when it was established, you had Muslim, Hindus, Christians, Parsis. They all belonged to the NIC. And of course, later on, they established contact with the African National Congress, established, I think, in 1912. And so many of the people in the African National Congress were Christian. So we had this cohesion between people of now extending even to the Christian sector. And of course, there are many names which are prominent. I'm not going to name them because I might miss out some and people might be offended. But we know many very prominent Christian, Muslim, Hindu leaders who were very active in the NIC, the TIC, the South African Indian Congress, and so on. Then we come, of course, later on to the establishment of the UDF. When it comes to the UDF, a number of Congress people are very instrumental in establishing the UDF. But of course, we know the most prominent people were, among others, was Alan Busak, Desmond Tutu, and so on. but there were people of different faith communities, and you could see them marching in the streets, arm in arm, with the banners. Okay, so here you had faith communities who were working together for the cause of justice or against the apartheid regime. The WCRP, I think, mentioned earlier, was quite prominent in the 80s. I was a member of the WCRP. We had people of all faith communities as part of the WCRP, included, of course, Ella Gandhi. She was part of it. We had Ibrahim Rasool became the ambassador, and so on. And we had I just forget the name, our Christian gentleman who passed away lately from Durban. I see my memory is fading. I'm getting old. Paddy Kani, right? They all were with us in this interfaith movement. And then we drew up a religious charter. Before the constitution was drafted, we actually got together and drafted a religious charter, which was given apparently to the Constitutional Committee. And I think that some of the clauses in the Constitution were drawn from that particular charter. Okay, then of course we come to the TRC. Now here is the whole issue of reconciliation. So we spoke about justice. Here's the issue of reconciliation. And I see right now the TRC is being discussed quite extensively. Yesterday, I think Yasmin Suka was on. She was also a commissioner. And they were discussing about the TRC because there were a lot of criticism as well that while it was a good initiative, but at the same time, it failed in a number of respects. Not getting real justice for people and so on. And of course, because it was voluntary, lots of people were involved in the human rights violations didn't come forward to confess. Some of them have died, of course, along the way and so on. So right now there are people who are still trying to campaign to get justice, to know who actually killed their family members and so on. But because Bishop Tutu was chairing this whole commission, it was seen as a commission which had a Christian ethos. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it has a Christian ethos. It's a question of confession and a question of forgiveness. Okay, so you can see a faith perspective coming out even in the TRC. So basically, I'm saying that people have played a role. Different faith communities have stood side by side and played a role in the past. Now, the question is, what role should they be playing? And again, I might be repeating some of what the previous speaker said, but this is my speech, so I'm going to say it nonetheless. I think the main thing is to promote the common good, to work towards the well-being of all members of society. So in other words, we need to become selfless, not be concerned only about our own communities, but be concerned about all the citizens of the country. So we should be working towards this well-being. And I think two things that faith leaders can actually do, and faith communities. One is to focus on shared values. I think previous speaker mentioned that there are many values that we share, the different faith groups, and not focus on the differences. If you want to have interfaith cooperation, harmony, then once you start talking about doctrines, you end up in the minefield. So I think the importance of accepting the fact that people have different beliefs, different traditions, different customs, but here the focus is how we can talk to each other, how we can interact with each other based on our common values. And I think that's very important. This means also that we can start cooperating on a whole range of issues. And I'm sure the Interfaith Group in Cape Town is doing that. I know WCRP here was also involved with certain, initiatives where different faith communities cooperated. So what has become very important, of course, one of the things which faith communities have to campaign against is corruption. Apart from poverty alleviation, demanding justice, demanding the promoting protection of women and children against abuse and so on. Because corruption is one of the things which is destroying our country. I actually interviewed Bishop Malusi about a few weeks ago on Channel Islam International on the Stop COVID-19 corruption campaign, which he is heading. And I think the faith communities, I know he's coming from a faith tradition, our faith communities need to cooperate in this respect. The fact is that our government has failed us in many respects. We don't have to go into detail, but we know the situation, and largely as a result of corruption. And so it's very important that this campaign is supported by the faith communities. And since government is unable to or unwilling to deliver on its campaign promises, for, of course, a variety of reasons, I think civil society has to begin to play a greater role. It did play a role in the past, and of course, it went into maybe sleep mode for a while, but I think it has to wake up, and civil society has to campaign now for justice, for human rights, for promoting common good of all the citizens, for providing essential services and so on. And the faith communities have to join civil society. They must be part of the civil society campaign in order to bring about justice. So I will end there, and hopefully I have not repeated much of what the previous speaker said, but maybe hoping that I complemented some of the things he said. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Dangor. I like that you spoke about corruption, and I just want to thank you for reflecting on our South African history, because South Africans' history is a very important part of our heritage and a very important part of our identity. Thank you. It was really a pleasure having you this afternoon. Our next speaker is Mr. MEC Ravi Pillay. Mr. Ravi Pillay serves as the MEC for Finance in the Provincial Government of KwaZulu-Natal. He previously served as MEC for Human Settlements and Public Works. A lawyer by profession, he was a student activist in 1976 and was recruited into the ANC in 1981. He has served and led several civic, sporting, and religious organizations. He played a leading role in the peace process on the South Coast during the turbulent 1990s. Mr. Ravi Pillay is a widely recognized and respected leadership figure in KwaZulu-Natal, generating much admiration for his principled approach to the most complex current challenges and his deep commitment to furthering the ideals of the Freedom Charter. Always an honor and pleasure to be speaking to you, MEC Ravi Pillay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tashmika. And let me recognize our fellow panelists, the leadership of the South African Hindu Mahasabha, and to the members of the community who are joining us online. Let me, too, like many others, start with a quotation from Nelson Mandela, and I'm pleased that this one wasn't included in the others' lists. And I quote, "Time and again, the prophets of doom have been confounded by the capacity and determination of South Africans to solve their problems and to realize their shared vision of a united, peaceful, and prosperous country." Unquote. And of course, these were Madiba's words at the Interfaith Service commissioning the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1996. It was a message of optimism. It was a message of hope. And whether we are leaders in the faith, social, economic, or political sphere, I think it's our basic duty to give our people a message of hope. In the latter part of that address, Madiba went on to say, and I quote, "The healing process is meant for the individual, the family, and the community. However, above all, the healing process involves the nation, because it is the nation itself that needs to redeem and reconstruct itself," unquote. 26 years into our democracy, the context in which Madiba was elected to lead us perhaps has not changed as drastically as we had hoped. And social cohesion remains one of our most testing societal challenges. The Human Sciences Research Council in 2004 defined social cohesion as, and I quote, "what holds societies together." Others have used the word glue. The key component is social justice, and others have spoken about that as well. This is the extent, or is the measure of the extent of fairness and equity in terms of access to and participation in the political, social, economic, and cultural aspects of society. We in KwaZulu-Natal had our own special committee on social cohesion, appointed by the provincial government, and we had many eminent people who served on it, led by Professor Paulus Zulu, Vasu Gandhan, Professor Cheryl Putkita, and the late Paddy Carney, who the previous speaker referred to. And they adopted the following working definition: that social cohesion can be characterized as a fluid continuum of community relations between individuals and between individuals and their institutions that strives for a significantly higher level of equality and mutual acceptance, close quote. In the political tradition from which many of us come, the Freedom Charter remains the most meaningful articulation of the society we seek. And I quote, "South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white." We must never ever tire of saying that. All national groups shall have equal rights. All people shall have equal right to use their own languages and to develop their own folk culture and customs. All national groups shall be protected by law against insults to their race and national pride. The preaching and practice of national, race, or color discrimination and contempt shall be a punishable crime, close quote. So those are high ideals indeed. But the society we desire will not simply materialize just because we proclaim it. The fault lines created by 300 years of conquest, slavery, colonialism, indenture, land dispossession, patriarchy, apartheid, and unfettered capitalism cut deep. So it came as no surprise then that in the 2015 report of the Special Committee on Social Cohesion, they identified economic inequality as the basis for existing and potential conflict in our society. It's a harsh truth that inequality has a toxic overlap with race. Now, this is not a normal Heritage Day. It's a Zoom meeting. It's a Zoom meeting because we are in this COVID space. And it's worth remembering that in this last 6 months, in KZN, at any rate, 118,000 people were infected. 2,604 people died. Over 150 of them were public servants, doctors, nurses, teachers, emergency workers, people in the front line of that fight. It's a wonderful contribution, but we must never forget, never take it for granted. We are pleased that there's a 90% recovery rate, allowing us to go to level 1. But let me also use this occasion to and urge every one of us to keep preaching the message that the second wave is possible and we need to be extremely vigilant. In fact, I think the message that we talk about super spreaders, events that are super spreaders. And there's the two main super spreaders are funerals and religious gatherings. So let me use this occasion to ask our religious leaders to please spread that message and adhere to the regulations. Our response has been, had 4 pillars. It was the health response, which is the hospitals, clinics, the public health education, the quarantining, the isolation sites, the screening, the testing. It's a massive exercise. We have the dealing with the vulnerable, in which the religious sector played an enormous role. And I think we must, at some point, give a much more official recognition of that role, civil society generally, and the religious sector in particular, the food parcels, the soup kitchens, which might be necessary to continue for some time. And then we have the compliance with the regulations, and lastly, economic recovery, which I'll say a bit about just now. So that was a massive amount of work where the state was almost the sole player in driving it to inviting criticism from some. But it's been said that the COVID-19 has some silver linings, and these are said to be: one, acceptance that the stark inequality and poverty in our country must be central to all our efforts going forward. Two, the full frontal confrontation of all that is wrong with our procurement system and the associated corruption, which many have spoken about. Three, that we need a much more visible and powerful social compact, uniting the major sectors of society, and in particular government, organized labor, business, and civil society. And four, which is an observation I made, that what I thought was a newfound acceptance and understanding of a scientific approach to matters, with the key question being, what works towards achieving our truly united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous South Africa? Now, our president has called for a strong social compact to unite us behind a common national program of unity, renewal, and inclusive economic recovery and growth. And as I said, the social compact is made up of government, business, labor, and civil society. And these the formations represented here today, largely religious, cultural, academic, and young people, I may say, are critical parts of the civil society component. And I would urge you to claim your space in that social compact. In the forums that I engage, civil society tends to be represented by civic organizations in the main, and we relate to religious and, to a certain extent, traditional leaders in parallel engagements. I think we need to be around the same table and engaging. It was reported this week that at NEDLAC, business and labor have reached almost 90% agreement on the content of an effective economic recovery plan. In our province, KZN, we have the KZN Economic Council, which also represents the same social compact at a provincial level, that is government, business, labor, and civil society. Here too, each social partner has made powerful contributions to the content of an economic recovery plan, the details of which are perhaps a subject for another day. But the key element that emerges as this task of building the social compact is engaged with is, what is in the national interest? Can we rise above our own narrow interests, make sacrifices, and contribute towards what I call the national interest? Surely, as many speakers have said, there is much to unite us, and the previous speakers have articulated that more eloquently than I could ever do. But let me add the following as things that unite us. Mandela's vision of a non-racial society as embodied in the Freedom Charter. 2, building a capable, ethical, developmental state. 3, the fight against corruption. And 4, building an inclusive solidarity economy. And perhaps it is in this last that we grapple to recognize the national interest. Is it because we look at it from our relative positions of privilege or deprivation only? And really we must work through this. And in the course of my work on this particular matter, I often find us talking past each other and too quickly resorting to labels rather than unpacking the issue. And so today you'll have people who are labeled as monopoly capitalists and others who will talk about radical economic transformation and be accused of just being a front for corruption. And yet there are elements of truth in both sides which need to be brought together. We quite simply cannot afford the luxury of the kind of divisions that are emerging, and I think which has provoked this workshop in many ways. We cannot afford these divisions in the face of the tasks that we have to execute. Worse still, it is that these divisions have the potential to grow into outright conflict. In the political literature I was schooled in, there was the principle of antagonistic and non-antagonistic contradictions. Now, we want to build this united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous South Africa. Now, our diversity often produces contradictions to that task of nation building. but mostly they are not antagonistic to our central task. But when you seek to advance your religious perspective by attacking others, by demeaning or insulting them, and even to the point of intra-sectoral violence, religious violence, as we have seen, then we are dealing with an antagonistic contradiction. Such forces have nothing to contribute to the national interest. In fact, it becomes a grave danger to the national interest. Such actions seek to destabilize society, to threaten the relative cohesion we have worked so hard to build, that Nelson Mandela, Ahmed Kathrada, Billy Nair, and George Supasad lived and sacrificed so much for. Of course, let us make no mistake too that there are forces out there, often externally driven, who pose a real threat and could undermine interfaith tolerance and harmony in our country. So whether you seek to support those who violently drive a religiously clothed agenda, as we see in northern Mozambique, or Hindu fundamentalists in India, or Christian fundamentalists in the USA, we must stand firm and build a solid defense against such extremist tendencies. Extremism will provoke extremism. In fact, when you look at our full political spectrum, there will be extremists, opportunists, and adventurists. We must call them out. We must marshal and organize a strong, progressive defense against what they represent. The overwhelming majority of our people expect that of us. Yes, we must seek to engage everyone and attempt to seek common ground. But on some positions, I believe, we hold the moral high ground and must be clear about that. Faith bodies have a critical role to play in advancing social cohesion. All of our religious teachings, as has been said, commends a pious and peaceful life, seeking social harmony and work in the service of others. I think the Swami spoke most eloquently and powerfully about that. We are blessed in South Africa that we are spared the kind of interfaith conflict that is common in so many places on our planet, but that's not guaranteed into the future. That is not to say, however, that there is synchronized harmony, quite the opposite in many instances, and that we have what we call intra-faith tensions, which polarize congregations and communities. Too frequently, our religious leaders, church, mosque, and temple communities find themselves in court. There are no winners in intra-faith conflict. The congregants are the biggest losers. They lose faith in their leaders, in themselves, and not infrequently in their faiths. So it is incumbent on us on this Heritage Day to appeal for also intra-religious harmony, in as much as we seek to protect interfaith harmony. And I think in Durban, we have a powerful legacy in organizations like Diaconia, which have led by stellar example in promoting interfaith communion. The Dennis Hurley Center in the heart of Durban stands as a faith monument to Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, African traditional faiths, the Baha'i and Saivites, all holding hands together for the common good and in the service of society's most vulnerable. If each faith were to present a united front to its followers, our capacity to confront the challenges of social cohesion and inequality will be enhanced considerably. Put another way, it is not enough to have religious tolerance just among ourselves. The greater challenge is to build the bridges within ourselves. To work for unity can never be a bridge too far. Friends, let me close with the timeless call to action from the Nobel laureate Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. And I quote, "Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, MEC Mr. Ravi Pillay, for that very comprehensive presentation. I can tell you, you're really going to make everybody think. And thank you for also reflecting on how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected South Africa. Our final presentation is by Professor Ashwin Desai. Professor Desai is a prolific sociologist, activist, and public intellectual. He holds a master's degree from Rhodes University and a doctorate from Michigan State University, United States. He is a professor of sociology at the University of Johannesburg. His co-authored book, Inside Indenture, was described as a scholarly and literary masterpiece, which must be read by all descendants of indentured laborers, as well as those still committed to a non-racial democratic South Africa, and is available on the internet for free, might I add. Professor Desai, thank you so much for being a part of this workshop. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Tashmika. And I listened to the speakers with absolute attention, and it warms your heart to think there are these kinds of people wandering around and doing the kinds of work they do. So, you know, everybody talks about how religious persecution, how people often use religion to suppress other people and love other people. I think in South African life, often intellectuals are often also come in for lots of criticism. And people, you know, I know one very big politician, he's got so much of power, but every time I share a platform and I get up to speak, he goes, oh no, this guy again, you know, as if they have a monopoly on truth. So, you know, often the politicians often feel that their way is the only way, and they have the solution to the truth. Similarly, I must say, when the history of religions are written of the world, I think there will be a part of that which will say that religions played an incredible role in society. But I think religions are also guilty of incredible wars, bloodiness, narrowness, prejudice. And so, you know, one enters this terrain with having to think about when people say interfaith. My own experiences are often that people come to gatherings such as this and other gatherings, and they always pay homage to the fact that, oh, we all respect each other. And then behind closed doors, they go, if that person doesn't accept my God, they will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think religious leaders have a lot to answer for. They can be hypocrites. They can lie in public and do something else. They're not too far off often from politicians, because often religion now has been reduced to how many people you have in your congregation, because that will translate out how much you have into your bank account. So it's quite incredible with the commodification of the holy word that it has now encompassed religion. And I think it makes us even more vigilant, and why these kinds of days are important. So that's my first point. My second point is, as intellectuals should, people use words very loosely, and they can come to mean different things, and they can be used against people. When people use words like tradition, it's such an easy word. Whose tradition? Who decided that's a tradition? Who decided that women can't become priests? Who decided that a woman's place is in the home? And so the issue of tradition is something that must be discussed. So you know, when Draupadi, on the basis of a gamble, was going to be sold out, Draupadi questioned her position. She posed the issue of, well, how can she, you know, on a gamble that Sun Coaster Sabaya be, you know, given to some other man? It's a questioning of tradition. And that's the power of Hinduism. That's the power of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, is that it poses to us moral dilemmas, not straight answers. And so when Arjuna actually asks the question about, you know, what should I do now? How can I go to war against my own family? It's a question that is posed to all of us about choices that we have. And these things come alive to us as real issues that are transcended and translated into our bodies. And so, and therefore, to be saying that, oh, I am a Hindu means to be a permanently and powerfully and questioning person. And so in the Vedas say, you know, why do the waters seeking to reach the truth never at any time cease to flow? Never at any time cease to flow. So we also ask questions then about the other part of this afternoon: social cohesion. Social cohesion for whom? Social cohesion to be imposed upon us. Social cohesion that we don't ask hard questions because we can create conflict. These are questioning things. People who are in the ruling class, people who are comfortable, they like social cohesion, because social cohesion means that they don't have to be pointed to. They don't have to be asked the hard questions. So social cohesion can be used to steal Ms. Gengan's point, can be used to make us fools. Make us fools, because to be an unquestioning person is to be a fool. And to just swallow anything that comes from on high is to make yourself a fool. And so for me, that becomes quite important. And, you know, I've been thinking the whole week, knowing that I, was coming on this program. And it's interesting that the advert for this program had, somebody was sending around an advert, because I think they obviously have problems with the Hindu Mahasabha. So they had a big, two crosses over the names of all the people who are going to speak here. And, it just reminded me of apartheid. It's exactly as MEC Ravi Pillay will tell you what apartheid did. They didn't decide what the message was going to be. They didn't want to ban you after the meeting, after what you say. Before you even spoke, they banned you and they censored you. And these people, put little crosses over, because these are small people. They decide to tell people not to even listen and then criticize, but you mustn't listen in the first place. And I still remember that, people say, a friend of mine said he didn't like a book. And I asked him, did he read it? He said, no, I didn't read it, but I don't like it. And so that's the kinds of psychologies that sometimes permeate. So I've been thinking about that. And I've been thinking about what does this word Hindu mean for us here in South Africa? And you obviously think about a big H, meaning being a Hindu. And then an I, a simple word I, like integrity, so fundamental to keeping your dharma, so fundamental to the way you conduct yourself in life. N for non-racialism. D for this very word that is central to what we are, dharma. And U for unity across the boundaries. That's what we are. And so I would think that we need to apply our minds to this and think about this, and think about looking at ourselves both internally and externally. And my last simple point is that if this is Heritage Day, we arrived here 160 years ago, and yet the only box we get to fill in this country, there are 4 boxes you get to fill in this country: white, colored, African, and Indian. There's nothing else. All over the world, you got African Americans, British Caribbeans. But here in this country, we are put in a box of just Indian, not Afro-Indian, not Indian African, not African Indian, but our whole 160 years is taken out of us. We are born on African soil. Our fathers and our grandfathers and our grandmothers and great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers were born on this soil. When will we ever be able to celebrate our African heritage? When will we be able to tick a box that pays homage to this major identity? Our identities have not stood still. We have changed. We have adopted ways that are different and I think better. We have challenged the caste system. We have challenged old traditions of sexism. We have reached out to other racial groups in this country and build new identities like Black and so on. And so when is this going to be recognized? And when are we going to have a movement from below that starts to say that we refuse to be categorized in this narrow, straight-jacketed way, like what Hinduism teaches you, a freedom, an openness, a water that ceases to flow? When are we going to challenge this very identity that, like apartheid, this government imposes upon us, and we're going to reach for new identities, to break out to the prison of identity and look for something else? And I think this Heritage Day gives us that opportunity. This 160 years in this neck of the woods. I mean, my God, the Zulu nation is only 200 years old. We're not far behind. Where is our Africanness? That's what we need to emphasize. And lastly, that is why I take issue in my closing remarks with the esteemed Professor Brij Maharaj, who wrote an article saying that he wants Diwali and Eid and so on to be public holidays. No, that's got another holiday in South Africa, and we don't even know which day of the Diwali are we going to have. Is the South Indians going to fight with the North Indians? When is the moon going to be sighted for the Muslims? No, rather Professor Brij Maharaj should say that everybody should read the Mahabharata, because the Mahabharata is like the Freedom Charter. It's a fantastic document of making you live a life of morality and principles. It's a document of the 21st century, printed, translated in different languages, make it available to the whole world, rather than having another public holiday and sitting at home and doing nothing. Thank you.
Prof. Desai, always a pleasure to listen to your presentations. I just want to talk about a summary of all the presentations here before we round up. Some of the media comments were very appreciative of the powerful presentations here today, and thank you to all the panelists. Some of the common themes in the presentations were tolerance, respect, peace, and harmony. There was an agreement that South Africa is a role model for multi-faith society, and that there's a need to be wary of narrow political agendas, and that interfaith harmony contributes to social cohesion. There's also a need to focus on shared value rather than differences, and I think that we can all agree on that. Religious cooperation can lead to coordination with addressing a variety of social challenges, and religions must be a part of a vibrant civil society. We must oppose all forms of extremism. We need to consider structures to address and reduce interfaith tensions when this arises. I'd now like to invite Mr. Trikhamji to address us. He will be concluding this afternoon's workshop. Thank you, Mr. Trikhamji.
Yeah, thank you, Tashmika. For a while, I almost felt like I was being bombarded, but then I realized that I was listening to nobody else but Professor Desai. Ashwin, I think some of the comments that you've made, they have really certainly evoked a new dimension in my mind about what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing, and what should we really be concentrating. The arguments that you put forward, firstly, what is tradition and who defined tradition? I think that is something that we can spend an entire afternoon having a workshop on. And it is so important and so relevant, because you are perfectly right. Everything that we call tradition has been imposed on us as a society as slaves. We just follow, and then follow means you follow tradition without really questioning originality, authenticity, without questioning why, what is the purpose of it, and so on. So I think that that's one very, very important concept that you've raised. And then, of course, your assessment of religious leaders also quite revealing. But at the same time, I think as you say it the way it is, and it is true. Yes, religion has been responsible for a great deal of morality and respect and integrity in the world. But at the same time, religion has also been responsible for wars in many parts of the world, and one can't take away that fact. But more damning for me was your assessment that even religious leaders can be hypocrites. They can go on public platforms and say something, talk about social cohesion, talk about interfaith harmony, talk about working together towards a common goal, which is social cohesion, as is the theme of today's workshop. But then yet they go behind closed doors, and then they will start to argue that no, if a person does not believe in my faith or does not accept my faith as being the faith in this world, I will have nothing to do with that person. Very, very interesting debate, and I think we need to sometimes expand on that and have you there, because it is so important to debate these issues. These are all issues that we have been somewhat, I wouldn't like to say sweeping under the carpet, but we've been avoiding. And you have really given us the opportunity to take it head on. And of course, the 2 points that you made at the end, one is that what are we in South Africa? Part of one of 4 boxes, the white, the colored, the African, and the Indian. And today we are repeatedly, it is so sometimes embarrassing when you're filling in all kinds of forms, whether you're making an application for employment or whether you are making an application for a passport in this country. Home Affairs even asks you which box there, Indian or Asian or colored or white or black. That is still there. And that's something that we need to question and need to eradicate in this country, because like you correctly point out at the very end, we are Africans. We are all born here. We are 4th generation South Africans who came, whose parents came. Yes, granted, we came. Our great-grandparents or grandparents or forefathers came down from India. But we are Africans, and when are we going to be called Africans in the traditional heritage terminology? So yes, Ashwin, thank you very much for that very insightful and very, very provocative contribution to this afternoon's debate. Ravi, as always, has been very methodical in the way he presented his. I like the idea of the contributions that have been made by interfaith dialogue, particularly, and the reference to diaconia. I thought that was really very good, Ravi. And more important, your assessment of what COVID-19 has done, especially in KZN. I think many of us just need to remind ourselves, and you've done precisely that because we are on level 1, everything is over. Well, it's not over. It's quite possible that in the next 2 weeks, if we get the so-called second wave, which every medical authority is warning us against, if it does happen, we will be back to the 27th of March again. And of course, starting to count the number of people that we knew who have succumbed to COVID-19. And then, of course, your closing remarks, quoting Rabindranath Tagore, those are such beautiful words, where the mind, where we have a mind without fear, right? And we hold our heads high, and where knowledge is free. Those are such powerful words coming from the great Rabindranath Tagore to leave us to think about. So thank you very much for your contribution, Ravi. Solly, Dangor, thank you very much again for what you've said. I think your participation in interfaith organizations, interfaith discussions, interfaith initiatives obviously put you in a little bit of an advantage. But I think your one comment that you made, which was very, very incisive for me, was the fact that you said, many of us religious people still tend to believe that religion is all about rituals. And this is where we need to do some kind of an introspection. And if that introspection then then emerge, rather from that introspection will emerge the whole notion of how we need to live together. The other comment, of course, quite provocative, I thought, is that, and it's almost in sync with what Ashwin said later on, that, many religious leaders occupy positions of power in political organizations. But yet, when they are in that political platform, or when they are conducting themselves as politicians, then all the morality and all the rationale that governs the religious principles seem to be parked away at home or in their offices whilst they conduct themselves as political leaders. Nalini, thank you very much for your contribution. Again, your involvement in the interfaith movement in Cape Town is highly advantageous for you to contribute to what you said. But I think one important point that you made, and that was covered by Ashwin as well, when he referred to some one or two individuals who were trying to dissuade people from having anything to do with the workshop this afternoon. Social media is destructive at most times and constructive at all the time. And people say things, and I think the point that you made is that many people use social media to say things that they would normally not say face to face. And it's almost an analysis of cowardly behavior. Tell me on my face, Mr. Trikamji, I don't like you at all because I think that you are the biggest liar on earth. Tell me that on my face, because you're entitled to tell me that. I would be entitled to defend myself. But go on to social media and say all the things, so to speak, behind my back, where you want everybody else to hear, but you're not prepared to let me hear, because I'm the person that you address. And of course, Saths, being Saths himself, has also left a very, very important question. Are we going to define ourselves, and it's an extension of what Ashwin said, are we going to define ourselves as Hindus or Indians or as descendants of endangered laborers, or are we nothing more than Africans? And that I thought was very, very good. And then, of course, Swamiji's presentation and my friend Bishop Malusi's Mphulwana's presentation equally covered those points with regard to well, I think Bishop certainly did a very good job in dealing with the macro structural perspective of the topic and what's happening in South Africa. And of course, Swamiji being Swamiji, he was as powerful, as incisive as ever, and started off with the quotation and referred to Vasudeva Kutumbakam. I think time is running against us, so I can see Tashmika already looking at me. Perhaps somebody wants to move a vote of thanks now, Tashmika. But perhaps we will need to have maybe a second round of this workshop. We'll think about it. But thank you for all your contributions on behalf of all the people who have been listening, who have streamed in, and of course, more than anything else, on behalf of all of us at the South African Hindu Mahasabha. And thank you to you, Tashmika, for a job well done. You were excellent.
Thank you so much, Mr. Trikamji. I really appreciate it. On behalf of the South African Hindu Mahasabha, it gives me great pleasure to express my heartfelt gratitude to our religious leaders and community specialists for blessing this occasion with your presence. Thank you to Swami Vedanand Saraswati, Bishop Malusi Mphulwana, Professor Saths Cooper, MEC Ravi Pillay, Miss Nalini Gengan, Professor Solly Dangor, and Professor Ashwin Desai for the wise words of wisdom that were disseminated by all of you to us on this Heritage Day 2020. We are so grateful for such an august panel for making themselves available on this public holiday. We would also like to express gratitude and appreciation to the media, Post, Rising Sun, Hindvani, and Lotus FM. Special thanks to the digital and technical teams who assisted in facilitating our webinar, Kiran Singh Designer Works, Niresh Siusankar, and Dinesh Naidu of Serendipity Corporate. From myself, Tashmika Sharma, I would like to remind you to tag our Facebook page with your Heritage Celebration post. Please stay safe during this lockdown. On behalf of the South African Hindu Mahasabha, I wish you all the best on this Heritage Day 2020. Thank you. Namaste.
Yeah, 1 year before, that's great.